Hi, I'm Carmen,
And I'm Steven, and this is Vienna Past and Present.
where we walk through the gilded and sometimes not so gilded halls of Vienna's history.
So how do we follow up an episode about Arnie? Well, with something oddly related.
Yeah, it is kind of related. So I guess when we think about Vienna, we think a lot about beautiful buildings and architecture and palaces. We've even talked about public toilets in an earlier episode, which is maybe less expected. And today we are back with another unique bit of street furniture. If you've visited Vienna or lived here for any amount of time, and especially if you've taken the trams, you may have noticed this unassuming, but also somewhat perplexing little accoutrement. And we are talking today about, of course, the handy-dandy street scales that you still see scattered around Vienna, and that maybe Arnie has used, who knows?
Maybe.
So, do you have any idea what I'm talking about when I say street scales?
Okay, well, when you first mentioned the scales, I really thought you were talking about weighing cars and trucks, like for at least a week of us talking about this topic. But to my recent surprise, no, like this is a more human story. I don't really know about these. I did not see them, but I don't know if there's a scale on a street, like would I notice that? So no, I don't really know what you're talking about.
I guarantee you saw them, but didn't pay any
Really?
attention.
Okay.
Yes, which is true for everybody who's ever been to Vienna. Everybody's seen them, but nobody can recall them. So yeah, we are quite literally talking about scales that you can weigh yourself on in public. And for anybody who's still confused, you can head over to our Instagram. You can find us at Vienna Past and Pres, and we will post some pictures there so you can see what the scales look like. I also want to give a quick shout out to a friend of mine who suggested doing an episode about this ages ago. So thanks, Ray. And there's also an article about the scales in the news a couple of days ago, and so I thought maybe now is a good time to do an episode on it, since apparently it's in the news, in the zeitgeist.
They're in the news too. Okay. So for those of us who assumed we were weighing vehicles today, like what is the Vienna scale scene like?
I mean, it is a bit of a scene. There are over 150 of these scales around Vienna, and there's about 400 in total in Austria. So I guess they're in other parts of Austria, in other cities, but just like you, I cannot recall seeing them anywhere else, although I'm sure I've come across them.
Okay.
They're sort of ubiquitous, but also just blend into the background. You kind of don't really pay a lot of attention to them. And so they offer you a very public weigh-in at, I have to say, bargain basement prices. Because in what has to be the most inflation-resistant service in the entire city, your very public weigh-in continues to cost, how much do you think?
I don't know, $1 or something like that.
20 cents, baby. And I think they've always cost 20 cents from what I can recall. I think they've never changed it. So talk about inflation resistant. What else can you buy for 20 cents in this economy?
Nothing? I mean, something to do with that change. Okay, wow. All right.
Yeah, literally I can't think of anything else that would cost 20 cents.
I can't right now.
I mean, I think even gum costs more than that these days.
Yeah.
So anyway, bargain basement prices. So that's, it's
Okay.
got that going for it already. So they're usually found near tram or subway stations, although I think there are a few in various parks and just around the city.
Okay.
And they have quite a history, it turns out.
Okay, so I'll do some stage setting here. The year was 1887. It was relatively politically stable. It was a prosperous time for the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Emperor Franz Josef had been ruling for decades at this point. Modernist artists and thinkers like Klimt and Freud were just getting started in Vienna. The Ringstrasse project was enriching the city with fantastic architecture, gas lights, sewers, rail. They were all expanding. Vienna was drawing people from all over the empire. Intellectuals at coffee houses was a thing. And in possibly our first episode callback, Karl Lueger, aka Sexy Carl, he wasn't married yet, but he was getting his start at this time. So some chaos was brewing, but it was a low-key golden age. I mean, maybe even the golden age recently. So yeah, what does a hip, beautiful imperial capital city need? It needs sewers, rails, gas lamps. Duh, it needs scales for its citizens. Okay?
Yes, of course. So yeah, like you said, the first of these scales in Vienna date back to 1887, when coin-operated machines first made their way from the US to Europe. And they only really attracted attention a year later, though. In, that first year, there were a couple of these scales around. But
WTF, okay? What is this? You would need an intro, probably. Okay, if you'd never seen anything like that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people had not ever seen anything like this. They were totally new. And so they only really caught on and really grabbed the public attention in 1887 when a year later in 1888, when they were shown as part of the 40th anniversary of the Kaiser Franz Josef's ascent to the throne. And so there were celebrations for this anniversary of him being 40 years, the emperor. And it included a presentation of Austrian industrial achievements. And one of those achievements, or one of the attractions, was a scale where members of the public could insert a coin to get their weight.
Okay. The cost was 3 kreuzers? Am I saying that right? I don't
Kreuzer.
know. What is it?
Kreuzer.
Kreuzer? Okay. I should have a joke there, but I don't. Okay, I don't know what these are, but they don't scream valuable coin to me. So that sounds cheap.
How rude. But it is cheap, you're right.
Sorry, yeah. I think you would be like, oh, you know what? I found a bunch of these in like some hoard. I'm going to sell these for a lot. You just don't hear about them. Anyway.
Yeah, they don't get the attention they deserve.
This is their moment. Okay, this is their moment.
This is their moment, exactly. So the scales were actually some of the earliest coin-operated machines that existed ever at all. And they originally cost 3 Kreuzer, as you said. And these were coins that were used in the Habsburg Empire. So the word Kreuz means cross in German. And these coins had a cross on them, so they were called Kreuzer.
Okay.
And they're basically like the cents of today.
Oh,
so
right. The
kind of bigger denomination of coins was called Gulden. That would be like a euro or a dollar. And then you had the cents, which were the Kreuzer.
Okay.
So it probably would be something like 3 cents today, like very, very cheap. And I looked online to get some kind of sense of how much is this relative to normal purchases at the time. And I found some information that like a small bread bun cost about 2 Kreuzer in 1892. And so 3 Kreuzer would have been, basically the cost of a small loaf of bread.
Okay. That sounds cheap. All right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds very affordable. And so at the time, it was not common for people to know their weight or even to have any real way to measure it, which is sort of hard to imagine today, right? Where it's just such common knowledge how much you weigh, and pretty much everybody, I think, has a scale.
Yeah.
Although, actually, I say that, but I don't own a scale and I don't really know what I weigh. I have like a general ballpark that I know, but I only really get weighed when I go to the doctor. So maybe the street scale would be useful for me too.
Well, yeah, hey, you're just choosing to live that Vienna Golden Age lifestyle. Okay, Carmen? Like, if the brilliant artist Klimt didn't know his weight, why do you need it? You don't.
Exactly.
Okay.
Who needs it?
Now we're giving medical advice. Great.
Yeah, but so at the time, people really didn't know their weight, and they really had no way to weigh themselves. You didn't have, at-home scales like we have today. And so when they were first introduced to the city, they caused a sensation because it was really the first time that people could weigh themselves.
So what were they like? Were these like manual or?
So they consist of a podium to stand on, like a small, like you would have for a scale, like a small thing that you step up onto.
Right.
And then they have a glass face behind which you can see the mechanics of the machine. So they have a pretty cool look to them.
Oh, it's like a little show. Okay.
Yeah. And then you have an arrow, basically, that just moves to show your weight, from 0 to 150 kilograms.
Okay.
You have this dial that just goes from left to right. So kind of what you would imagine a scale to look like, but kind of old-timey. And, you have the mechanics of the machine exposed, which always looks cool.
Okay, and it's interesting that it's in kilograms, right? Because I was thinking, okay, there might be like some old imperial kind of weight happening here, but all right, this is sounding very modern.
Okay, America, you're one to talk. Okay. No.
I kind of thought it might be like, the weight of 2 of the emperor's feet or some random thing at this point still, right? So, okay, kilograms. Oh, you could use this today.
Yeah, I think Europe was well onto kilograms at this point, which,
right.
The U.S. still hasn't managed.
I'm complimenting it. Okay.
Yes, it's a real unit of measure, if that's what you're getting at.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, and so some of these early street scales, they even included a mirror so that people could kind of check out what they look like. Because, mirrors were also not that common to have in your home. And one of these very early scales, so the ones that you see out on the street today in Vienna don't have mirrors. I guess those would have been vandalized or broken a long time ago. So none of them have mirrors. But one of these very early scales that does still have the mirror and like a very old school look to it can be found today in the Technical Museum of Vienna.
Okay. So was the reaction positive, or like how do people react when they're told by the state to weigh themselves in public? Okay, I can see this going a couple ways.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think the state was like mandating that you had to weigh yourself. They were just offering the possibility, just suggesting.
Just suggesting, right?
Right.
It's here if you need it.
No, in the beginning it was regarded with fascination, and it did spread quickly throughout the city, especially in the interwar years. They became quite popular. But at the same time, they also were, from the very beginning, kind of the subject of jokes and satire around especially members of the nobility weighing and inspecting themselves on public streets.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So you had some kind of cartoons and stuff that came out. You know, you have like the fancy rich people, and then they're, you know, publicly weighing themselves on one of these contraptions.
Right, because there is something kind of equalizing about that.
Yeah. And then there were also some other jokes around the fact that the very first popular coin-operated machine that ever kind of spread in the German-speaking world was a chocolate dispenser that was developed in Germany. And so there was a kind of popular joke at the time that people called the police to report that they had put 3 Kreuzer, like 3 coins, into this machine, but no chocolate had come out. And yeah, there were these jokes that like you should call the police and report that the machine wasn't working. So I guess that was the humor of the time.
Okay, it's kind of cool, like some early, public humor.
Exactly. And so, despite the fact that you had these jokes and this kind of satire around it, the street scales also coincided with an emerging concern for health, fitness, and a new beauty aesthetic that really prized slimness that you didn't really have before.
Wow, yeah.
And I wonder how much there's kind of a circular causation there, right? That on the one hand, now that you can weigh yourself and that you do have mirrors and kind of a more access to this kind of thing, that in turn also makes slimness and, a lower weight somehow maybe more desirable.
Right. Like at the risk of becoming a psychology podcast, right? But yeah, it's like more information is good, but like if we fixate, right? And especially back then, I'd think when you dress warmly, you just kind of would wear like 5, wool coats kind of thing, right? Like modesty was so different. You just weren't confronted with maybe your body in the same way if you don't own a mirror at home. So yeah, it could be a big change, like in the public dialogue and how you think about yourself. And yeah,
and I think prior to this time you had most people living out in the countryside working on farms where you were just trying to get through your day and get your stuff done, and being strong,
you weren't trying to lose 2 pounds.
Being strong was probably important, and kind of robust. And you were not concerned about, do you weigh what you should weigh, or did you, gain or lose weight? And so I think, all of these things kind of emerge around the same time. You have a more urban population. They maybe have time for these kind of things. Plus, then you have scales that are more accessible and mirrors and all of this. And so it kind of all probably comes together in some way. And so the scales became a part of daily life around this time, but they really boomed in the post-war period. So in the 1950s and beyond, especially, of course, in the immediate aftermath of the war, you had poverty to deal with, and I think people had bigger problems than weighing themselves. But as soon as sort of the immediate destruction of the war had kind of been overcome, these scales and public weighings were apparently very, very popular. And they were also marketed as a tool that was useful for people to check their health. And in some cases, they even very helpfully included, in quotes, ideal weights for different genders and age groups.
Oh, yep.
Which, can you imagine? It's like, this is your gender, this is your age group, this is what you should weigh. Great, thanks.
It's great blanket measures, but I don't know, like it sounds really modern, modern and problematic in a modern way, but yeah, I don't know. It seems like more information is probably good.
Yeah, and so they were popular for quite a while, but then by the 1970s, attitudes around public weighing had changed. And, by that stage, most people had scales in their homes. You could buy them. They were, much more available for people. And so by the 1970s, we started to have more of an attitude that we have today, that your weight is more of a private matter. And also in some ways, like a shameful affair. You wouldn't really want to be weighing yourself on the street today, and that kind of started in the 70s. And so the street scales began rapidly disappearing, just because people were using them less and, there was less demand for them.
Okay.
But like I said, more than 100 still exist around the city, and the ones that still exist were primarily all produced by the company Berkel, which
Okay.
I read somewhere being called the Rolls-Royce of personal scales. So, top of the line.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And so the very last public scale that was ever produced in Austria, Berke is an Austrian company that produced the scales here, and the very last public scale that they ever produced was in 1978. So there have been no new scales produced since then, despite the fact that 150 of them still remain in the city.
Yeah, so what's like the Vienna scale scene like today? I guess, I mean, I don't know, these sound like, kind of these big tough machines or something, but I guess I'm kind of surprised they're still around.
Yeah, it is kind of surprising, and it is kind of a question of what has allowed them to persist to the present day. And one thing that surprised me is that they're not maintained by the city.
Oh.
I assumed that they would be, but they are not. They are actually maintained by a couple whose name is Andreas and Karin Pop. So this is a couple
Okay.
that lives, outside of Vienna, and we have them to thank because
What?
they maintain and actually own these scales. Yeah, it's a private couple.
Yeah, I figured this was like a public utility. Another shocking twist.
Yeah,
Okay.
so Andreas and Karen, they are a couple from Burgenland, which is the easternmost state of Austria, bordering on Hungary, and it's not really very far from Vienna.
Okay.
And so their background is that Andreas is a locksmith, and in 1980, when he was 22, he took over operation and ownership of public scales in Austria. That was like a thing you could do in the 80s, apparently. You just become the owner of all the public scales. And I mean, at the time, there were still more scales around, and there were also multiple owners and operators, so he was not the only one. But over the years, basically everybody else exited the business, and now it's only Andreas and his wife, Karen, left, owning and operating all of the scales in Austria.
Wow. I didn't think anyone would have a scale empire.
Yeah.
Wow.
A
Yeah.
scale monopoly. I mentioned before that there's still around 400 of them around Austria. They operate and / own all of those scales, and about 150 of them are still in Vienna. And like I said, the cost to weigh yourself is
Gosh.
20 cents. So, I mean, it's cheap. And one thing is that you do have to have correct change. So,
Okay. But for 20 cents, I'm like, they don't have to do much more. Okay. It's like a benevolent monopoly vibes to
yeah,
me.
I mean, the price is right, I have to say. And yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't think that price has changed the entire time that I've lived here. I've lived here for 16 years, and I'm quite sure the price, I mean, not that I've ever used one of these scales or seen anybody use them. So I couldn't exactly say.
Okay.
But
They have nothing to do with my life, but
I really suspect that the price has not changed since the euro was introduced in 2002, because they all have this little sign on them. I suspect it would be kind of expensive to replace them all, because they have this kind of stylized 20-cent little piece on the scale, and so I suspect that was introduced with the euro back in 2002 and just has never been changed. But the maintenance of the scales has gotten more expensive over the years.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, and part of the problem is that a lot of the replacement parts are no longer produced. I mean, the scales themselves are no longer produced, and a lot of the replacement parts are not produced either. And so the Pops, this couple that owns and operates these scales, they've had to get pretty creative in some cases in order to even repair any of these scales. And I found a newspaper interview with them, and they said that they also were constantly, aside from kind of being creative about how to repair them, they said that they were also constantly looking for the best locations for the scales. And so they apparently moved them around, which I never realized.
Yeah, I guess that would make sense. Like if something, there's an area where there's construction, right? And now people won't see this because there's like a sign here. Like, yeah, you would have to be managing that a lot. Like if you have so many in this city that is like changing that much, it's like any big city would. So, okay, the Pops are not just like sitting there collecting their, 20-cent checks or whatever.
No.
Okay, they're working.
They're working. They're looking for the best locations. They're out there. They're hustling.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, and now I need to pay attention if a scale pops up somewhere new.
Yeah, send them like a thank you text, okay? You might see Karen out there like lugging it. Okay.
But these things have to be heavy. I mean, they're big.
I'm sure, yeah. I can't, how would you move anything? These huge weatherproof, I assume, things. Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, it must be a production. So yeah, they are out there doing the work.
Okay.
And what I also found quite interesting, I mean, for the fact that they cost 20 cents, according to this interview with them, they say they managed to live quite well off of this business, which I find hard to imagine because I honestly don't think I've ever seen use one ever. And most people really have no idea where they even are, despite probably walking past them virtually every day. They're big, they're in very public spaces, but somehow they just totally blend in. And only when kind of writing up, the information for this episode and when I was doing the research, I kind of thought to myself, like, where is one even in my area? Like, I feel like they are around, but I don't really know where. And then, I went to take the tram someplace, and at my tram stop, which I go to every single day, there is a scale there, and I didn't realize it until I was doing this episode.
Oh, wow. Okay, any, Viennese people listening to this, okay, I'm sorry that, it's going to be so apparent how unobservant you are, right? You listen to this episode, and it's just going to, you'll be like tripping over one the next day.
Yeah, they're really kind of everywhere when you start looking for them, but they just, they're sort of these things that just... It's like a stoplight or something. They exist, but like where exactly?
Right.
I don't know.
Right. That's right. It's like on no one's mental map. Okay.
Yeah. But, I mean, they say that they make a good enough business with it to live from, so obviously somebody's using them.
Yeah.
According to them and some of the other articles that I read, it is mostly tourists, which makes some sense.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Interestingly, the one that I mentioned before, this like really old one with the mirrors and stuff on it that is displayed at the Technical Museum, also gets used surprisingly often. So apparently it's in operation and you can actually use it and put, your 20 cents in and weigh yourself. I found an article from a historian whose name is Peter Paya, and he said that, they make a decent amount of money with that one as well. And apparently they've become very popular as a selfie motif for tourists and travelers.
Oh, you know what that means, Carmen, right? Selfies with public weigh-ins. Okay, that's going to be a big part of our social media now. Okay, Carmen, tracking Carmen's weight across Vienna.
Test the calibration of the scales and see if they agree. Otherwise, the pops are getting a call from me.
Right. At the pops, this one needs a recalibration.
This one reads too high. It needs help.
Just help.
Yeah. Apparently, a lot of people also kind of do these little challenges to see how many people can stand on a scale before it hits the maximum kilogram limit, which the pops do not love because it damages the scales and it increases their maintenance costs. So they do not encourage you to do this, according to the interview I read.
Okay.
And so they've basically had to invest quite a lot over the years to make the scales more resistant to damage and vandalism. And, ultimately, there isn't really a reason for them to exist anymore. Like, nobody really needs these scales, and it's sort of like a little tourist curiosity, and most of us living here never even notice them, right? And so I think it's kind of amazing that they continue to preserve and operate the scales as their business. And in a way, they really are also preventing a piece of cultural and technological history from dying out. Yeah. Because on its own, they probably would have already disappeared.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. And I don't know, it's like this is the stuff that I think makes the city unique, all of that.
Yeah, and so, I mean, to their credit, they have been successful in keeping the scales from totally disappearing. But there is kind of a bigger problem on the horizon, which is that they're going to retire soon. I think they're both in their 60s already. And there's really no one to take over the business. Their children are not interested in it, and it's really unclear who else could or would take over. So who knows what will happen to them. And I have to say, even though I barely noticed that they exist, and I literally had to, do research for this episode to realize that there's one that I walk past every single day, I still think it would be somehow sad if they disappeared after all this time. They've managed to survive 150 years.
Something you didn't even know. Yeah, something you didn't even know was there that you loved, okay? I open junk drawers at home, and I have that feeling sometimes, right? I'm like, oh, this. Put it back. No, I mean, it's cooler than that. And hey, you never know who might hear this and get inspired, right? So send your essays, your resumes to Vienna Past and Present at Gmail for consideration. You could take over the scale empire.
We'll pass it on to the pops.
Okay, we will pass it on to them. That's right.
We'll put in a good word.
I'm just wondering, how much do you think Franz Josef weighed? did he know he was going to be publicly weighed at his celebration, right?
Oh.
I just hope he was.
I wonder. Oh my God, I hope he was.
Because back then, there probably wasn't the same stigma or, complication around that. I wonder if they just, weighed him and weighed a bunch of people, or how that was, rolled out at the celebration.
Yeah, true. I wouldn't, because, I think at the time it was just a curiosity, right? Or a sort of technological marvel, and didn't have anything to do with,
right.
Public shaming of your weight, I assume.
Yeah, so I am sending you to now dig through the archives, okay, and find the article or
find
whatever.
Out how much he weighed. I feel like his mutton chops and facial hair alone was a couple of kilos.
I figured he's not going to be light, okay, after 40 years of that. Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, so that's the story of the scales. So if you're walking around Vienna, if you're visiting, or if you live here, keep an eye out, pay attention. You really will see them everywhere when you actually are looking for them. And if you've got 20 cents hanging around to spare, give yourself a little weigh-in.
That's right, which people don't always have 20 cents. I'm just thinking, last time I had 20 cents just hanging out, it's I got change from some random stuff. I'm one of these, phone using tapper people. So, but yeah, hey, it's going right to the pops, okay? They're doing good work.
All right, so that is our story about the scales, and that's it for our show today. So thank you for listening, and if you like what you heard, share with your friends or leave us a 5-star review. And if you didn't like it, then, well, don't worry about that review.
You can find us on social medias, Vienna Past and Pres on Instagram, or send us your episode ideas at viennapastandpresent@gmail.com. We will read them and listen to them, and maybe even make episodes like we did today.
Exactly. All right, auf Wiedersehen, pfiat euch, Papa.
Bye. Okay, so I'll just do some stage setting here. The year was 1877. It was relatively politically stable. It was a prosperous time.
It was 1887, according to your notes, not 77.
Oh, did I say that? Oh, I didn't notice. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Oh, God. Okay.